Okay, first question comes from Matthew D. Montanini, who asks, how does your work build upon Hurtado's, Balcom's, and Fee's?
Okay. I particularly build on Richard Balcom's work. He argues that the way we understand Jesus in Paul is by understanding the so-called divine identity. And for Richard Balcom, that is very much about God's relationship to all creation. So only God is eternal, only God creates, and only God has the divine name, only God is worshipped. And he then looks at Paul in light of these general themes and says, look, this is how Paul speaks of Jesus Christ. He is co-creator, he is eternal, pre-existent, and so on. I build on that by focusing on what I think is actually more important in Paul, because Paul does speak about God's relation to the whole of creation and Christ's as well in his letters, but there's not much there. Much more important in Paul's letters is the relationship that Christ has with Christians, and that keys into a much larger set of themes as well in Israel's scriptures, which speak of God's relationship particularly to Israel. And it's that parallel that I'm drawing out, that Balcom hints at, but I'm building on. And Hurtado as well, he spends a lot of time focusing on cultic devotion to Jesus Christ to make claims about Christology. He does a lot more than that as well, but this certainly is a part of his work. I suggest that Hurtado's focus hasn't been sufficiently guided by Paul's letters. He hasn't allowed the texts themselves to dictate the agenda, and so I subsume his focus on cultic devotion into a much larger and more Pauline pattern, I think, anyway, namely the Christ relation, that I call it. Now, Gordon Fee has written this huge book, Pauline Christology, and he wrote it and published it when I was still writing my PhD. So I had to make a very clear case why my PhD needed to be written in light of his book. So he comes in for a lot of criticism in my book, but that's not nothing personal. It was simply to make sure that my PhD showed its originality. I rely a lot on some of his exegetical conclusions, but I critique radically his interpretive method, and that will be something that I go into in the book. I think he's committed to what seems to me an implicit Aristotelian epistemology, or ontology rather, and I prefer what I call a more relational way of approaching the Pauline letters.
Excellent. All right, our next question comes from Nick Norelli. It says, ask him how he feels his approach to demonstrating divine Christology will impact the field.
Well, I've just come from a panel session where we've been discussing early Christology. I would hope that it puts Paul back into the centre of the debate again. There's been a little bit of a sort of silent consensus that there's disagreement about how Paul's Christology should be understood. You've got Larry Hurtado and Richard Balcom and Gordon Fee on the one hand, but then you've got people like Jimmy Dunn and James McGrath, Pamela Eisenbaum on the other hand. They can't reach an agreement, so let's go to John's Gospel or somewhere else for definitive Christological statements. I think that's a mistake. I think things are actually very clear in Paul, especially when we reorientate what we mean by Christology to be not just about propositions, but about this relation between Christ and the church. So I'm hoping that it's going to put Paul back into centre stage in such a way as well that makes very clear that the burden of evidence now, the need for further discussion is very much from those who would deny a Pauline divine Christology. As far as I see, that a lot of work needs to be done for there to be any pushback denying a Pauline divine Christology. I think is pretty clear now.
All right. There you go, Nick. All right. Because we've been told that there's no such thing as a bad question, although Chris might disagree with us, Simon Watkinson wants to know the meme he finds funniest.
Thanks, Simon.
He's just getting started.
He's just getting started. One of my colleagues, I see. The meme I find the funniest. You know, this is the problem, especially when being filmed, that my humour isn't for family consumption.
Oh, right.
Next question.
Next question. Fair answer. Maybe this one will be a little easier. Also from Simon, and this is the one we'll wrap on for your sake. Which cat breed is your favorite?
Oh, now this question is clearly coming from the fact that my Twitter feed, in the best tradition of serious academic rigor, is mostly about cats, which is fair enough, I think, because they're funny, and that's what the internet's really for, I think, is funny cat videos.
That's why we're talking about cats right now.
Exactly, thank you. And I like cats that can't jump. I know that's not a breed, but I like any cat, tabby cat, whatever. If they can't jump and you've got a video of it, that's a cat I like.
Now, do you find that this is more likely to be a fat cat that can't jump, or are there other conditions that would render a cat unable to jump?
Yeah, I think there are. I think a slippery floor is the key, because then they just go nose down straight away, which is hilarious and worthwhile mentioning.